Thank you so much for everyone for tuning in for today's webinar. My name is Lily Moloch, and I am the marketing coordinator for the Nature Conservancy in New Jersey. And today I will be facilitating this webinar. Before we dive in, I just wanted to quickly go over a couple of housekeeping items. Next slide, please. So we have enabled closed captions for this webinar. To access them, look for the closed caption button on your Zoom toolbar. There will be a button with two C's on it. If you click on that, you'll be able to turn them on or off. During the webinar, we will have the Q&A feature active. So please, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, make sure to put them in the Q&A box. There will be time at the end of the presentation for a Q&A session, and we'll do our best to address all of your questions. And then lastly, we are recording this webinar. Later this week, you can expect to see a follow-up email from us with a link for the webinar recording and any other relevant resources that come up during this presentation. And now I would like to introduce you to our presenters. Next slide, please. So today, the Nature Conservancy is joined by Gretchen Fowles. Gretchen received a bachelor's degree in biology from Carleton College in Minnesota and a master's degree in wildlife ecology from Idaho State University. She has been working for New Jersey Fish and Wildlife's Endangered and Non-Game Species Program since 2003, managing the program's rare species database, serving as the state's bobcat and Allegheny woodrat biologist, handling a wildlife detection dog for the program, and co-leading New Jersey's Connecting Habitat Across New Jersey project. From the Nature Conservancy's New Jersey chapter, we have Elliot Nagel. Elliot is the Director of Lands, where he oversees the organization's land conservation and stewardship program. Prior to joining TNC, Elliot worked with the New York Botanical Garden, U.S. Forest Service, New York City Department of Environmental Protection, and the NJAES Rutgers Cooperative Extension. He has over a decade of experience in the fields of ecology, forest management, and green infrastructure. Also joining us from TNC is Phil Echeverria. Phil is the Director of Government Relations, where he oversees our federal, state, and local lobbying and policy initiatives. He's been working in the government relations field for over 10 years, focusing on healthcare, environmental and conservation policy, and has worked on a number of popular state and federal issues, such as access to telemedicine services, increased funding for Alzheimer's research, and lobbying for the Federal Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We're very excited to be joined by our presenters today. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Gretchen so we can go ahead and get started. Take it away, Gretchen.
Okay, great. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really excited to talk to you all today. So identifying and building safe wildlife crossings through roadways is one of the main actions that we take as part of our Change or Connecting Habitat Across New Jersey project. The goal of Change is to make the landscape in New Jersey easier for wildlife to be able to move through. And I'm one of three people that are working on the project for Fish and Wildlife. My two colleagues, Brian Zarati and Mackenzie Hall, also work on the project. So the change tools, which I'll show you, have been available now for the past 5 years or so. And I'm going to go through some of those tools and then show you some of the wildlife crossings that we have so far in New Jersey. Wildlife crossings like this. This is a giant culvert that's under Route 80, under 6 lanes of traffic, and it wasn't built for wildlife, was built more for hikers and bikers, but wildlife do use it. And I also just wanted to say that I work on bobcats as well as part of my job, and so this presentation is going to be a little bit heavy on the bobcat side, but that is appropriate because bobcats are one of the main species that we were thinking about when we initiated the Change project. So the basic concept behind the project is just a really simple one, that wildlife need to be able to move to find food, shelter, mates, and other resources. And this is especially true in the age of climate change, where more and more wildlife are facing pressures from changing temperatures, changing fire regimes, water levels, invasive species, et cetera. And so they really need that ability to be able to shift and adapt to find areas that are suitable for them. And in New Jersey, this has become, a pretty difficult challenge for a lot of wildlife. We have the densest human population of any state in the country. That map on the left starts in gray at 1986 with the urbanization, and then as the years go along, urbanization shows up in red. So you can just see that level of urbanization across our state. And we also have a very dense network of roads, including a lot of high volume roads. So those are vehicles with over 10,000 vehicles a day on them. Those are in the map in red on the right. So that just makes it very challenging for wildlife to be able to move. And there's over 120 native terrestrial species in New Jersey that um, are sort of threatened by this level of habitat fragmentation. This is, just a map showing some wildlife that have been reported on roadways. I'm sure you've noticed this as you've driven around New Jersey. That map on the left are just wildlife, like I said, that have been reported on roads to us just opportunistically, not as part as any particular survey effort. The map shows about 2,500 of them since 2019, but the numbers are far, far greater than that. And the chart on the right shows just the months over which those observations have occurred, with obviously the summer months being a bit more, just with reptiles and amphibians being active. And I'll come back to this, but we do have a mechanism where people can report observations of wildlife on roads that they see through our NJ wildlife tracker application. And it just helps us understand where wildlife are trying to cross our roadways. And to go to the bobcat example, actually seen an increase in the number of bobcats hit by vehicles on roads in the past few years, with last year being the highest we've ever documented of 30 bobcats that were hit by vehicles. Most of these bobcats are young, about 70% of them are less than 2 years old. So these are kittens trying to keep up with the mom, or juveniles that are just trying to find a territory of their own. So they're going into unfamiliar areas, maybe a bit naive to roads to begin with, and are getting hit in that process. And then the map on the right just shows in the past 5 years where most of those, or where all of those vehicle strikes have happened, with most being in Sussex County. And just wanted to put in a plug that if you ever do unfortunately see a dead bobcat on the road, please call our DEP hotline number. We go out and we collect that carcass, and a veterinarian does a full necropsy on it. We take samples. All that information is really helpful for us to better understand the health of the bobcat population. And bobcats, I should say, are listed as threatened in New Jersey. So besides causing mortality, those major roads, even for a highly mobile species like the bobcat, can serve as barriers to movement. So if they're not killed on those roads, they're still affected by those roads, just impeding where they're moving. So this map that I have up here shows those high volume roads in red again. And then each color represents point locations for one individual bobcat over about a year's time. So these are bobcats that we've had with radio telemetry collars on them. And you can see just by looking at this map, kind of that influence of those major roads on their home range configuration, that the roads seem to be dictating where their home ranges are. And then if we automate one of those, so this was a female bobcat near Route 15 up in northern New Jersey, over a year's time, you can see her what seems like just continually bouncing off that highway. So that kind of helps start to tell the story of bobcats in New Jersey, that these barriers to movement seem to be very much affecting their distribution. So this series of maps helps explain that. The map on the left are confirmed occurrences of bobcats from 2014 to 2024. And you can see that most of them are up in northwestern New Jersey. We do have some south of Route 78 more recently, which is great. That map in the middle shows suitable habitat that's been modeled by a master's degree student at University of Delaware for us. The areas in green being predicted to be suitable habitat for bobcats. And bobcats did historically occur statewide. So there's suitable habitat for them. But it seems that the limiting factor here is habitat connectivity for them. The map on the right is a habitat connectivity map specifically built for bobcats, though it matches up quite well to our change mapping. And it just shows through central New Jersey, particularly kind of these pinch points where it's difficult for bobcats and a lot of wildlife to get through. And the geography here is that, on the western side through that central New Jersey section, we've got Philadelphia, and then up to the east is New York City. So it's very good for people traveling between those two cities, but that zone of urbanization and dense roads have made it pretty challenging for wildlife. And ultimately, this movement barrier effect can have genetic consequences. We have evidence of this amongst timber rattlesnake populations down in the pinelands, where some researchers have found that there are populations on either side of paved roads that are genetically distinct from each other, most likely because of those paved roads serving as a barrier. So this kind of isolation and lack of gene flow where populations can't intermix anymore is really not good for the sustainability of populations. And the same is true. We conducted a recent study amongst native mammals in New Jersey. We looked at 10 different species and collected DNA from them across the state, though bobcats was just northern New Jersey because that's where their range is restricted to at the moment, and found that among 7 of those, the ones that I've got circled in blue there, their gene flow is being negatively affected by human modification, urbanization, and roads. So this is concerning not just for some of our listed species, but even, our more common species. But it's not all gloom and doom, I promise. We do have some good news, which is that New Jersey has done a fantastic job of preserving open space. Groups like the Nature Conservancy and within DEP, the Green Acres program, have done, amongst many others, have done a fantastic job of preserving land. We just feel like at this juncture, we just have to be really strategic now to make sure that those preserved lands aren't left as isolated islands in some cases, but are part of a, functionally connected network of land that wildlife can move within and in between. And that's where the Change Project comes in, where we've developed it to offer different tools and resources to guide 3 types of actions that we think are important to creating a functionally connected landscape. One is land protection, the other is habitat management and restoration, and then the third is mitigation of road barriers or building these safe wildlife crossings. And all 3 of those are absolutely intertwined. You can't just focus on preserving habitat without making sure that wildlife can get across the roadways, just like you can't just concentrate on wildlife crossings without having habitat on either side for them to go to. So we developed Change as part of a large working group over several years. And the 2 main products that resulted are a mapping application that I'll show you and a guidance document that are interactively linked together. And the main kind of one-stop shop for finding information about the project is the URL I put up there, change.nj.gov. Okay, so if we take a look at the mapping first, this is it's called a web viewer. It's just an online interactive map that if you have a computer and an internet connection, you can access this mapping. And to get started, I recommend you go to this little eye icon on the right here. And if you click that, there's a menu that comes down that has a short tutorial video, as well as a quick start guide as to how to kind of get started with the mapping. And then if you scroll down, it also lists all the layers that we developed as part of the project and what they represent. And then just wanted to mention one other thing, which is the kind of "You Are Here" button on the left. So you can use this on your phone when you're out in the field, if you're going for a hike or um, in your favorite spot in New Jersey, you can see the connectivity context of that spot right on your phone based on the change mapping. So I was just going to go over a couple layers within here. This is kind of the foundational layer, which is the change habitat cores and corridors. So the cores are in the green. These are contiguous areas of natural land cover. And then the different areas in brown there are the corridors that are connecting them. And if you click on a core or a corridor, in this case, a core, a pop-up window comes up with some basic information and a link at the bottom that takes you to the section of our guidance document that talks about recommendations and resources for delving into habitat protection and habitat restoration. A couple other layers we have in here are preserved land. So in dark green and yellow are areas that are preserved. So you can see which areas within change cores and corridors are preserved or which ones are not that, we might want to target for protection. And then those different colored squares that I have in here, those are they represent a culvert inventory. So bridges and culverts that are under our roads to pass water. There's a standardized methodology that University of Massachusetts has put together, and 13 states across our region are actually using it, including New Jersey, where folks can get trained, go out and evaluate these bridges and culverts, take different measurements, and that gets plugged into an algorithm that scores that structure as to how passable it likely is for wildlife. There's one for aquatic wildlife, so fish, and then terrestrial wildlife. And so I'm showing you the terrestrial wildlife one. And the scores range from no barrier, which is in kind of bright blue, to red, which is a severe barrier. And so if we click on one of these, in this case, I'm clicking on a severe barrier culvert, a pop-up comes up. Again, it has a link at the bottom there that if you click that link, it takes you to the regional database that shows you all the different measurements that were taken. And then it also shows you pictures. So this makes sense that this structure would come back as a severe barrier for terrestrial wildlife. There aren't that many species other than fish, and we're talking about terrestrial wildlife, that would use that structure if they came upon it. They're much more likely to go up and over the road to get to the other side. So far we've evaluated over 800 of these structures within change mapped areas in the state. And not too surprisingly, a lot of them have come back as severe or significant barriers. And the reason it's not surprising is because that wasn't taken into account when these structures were originally built. They weren't built for wildlife, they were built to pass water. But we have come upon some that, even though they weren't built for wildlife necessarily, they are being used for that purpose. And so knowing where those are in the landscape is really important. This is one of my favorite ones. We have a volunteer who might be watching this webinar. Hi, Melissa, if you are. She has a camera up that's helping monitor this particular structure under a major highway. Again, 6 lanes of traffic that are over this bobcat right now. And this structure was not built for wildlife, but is regularly used by bobcats, fox, coyote, bear, all sorts of wildlife. So again, knowing where these structures are on the landscape's extremely helpful because these wildlife crossings are one of the hardest parts of the whole project. They're very difficult to implement. So if we can take advantage of ones that are already in the ground and being used for wildlife, or with a slight tweak could really be used, this is really beneficial, and we can focus land protection and restoration then on either side of them. This is another one. This is Route 195 in Monmouth County. You can see a change corridor going right through here. And there's a bridge there that, again, not built with wildlife in mind necessarily, but it has great natural habitat all throughout the structure and on both sides. So absolutely passable by wildlife, and most species that come upon this, if they're traveling down that riparian corridor, are just going to keep on going safely under that bridge rather than make the effort to go up and over the road to get to the other side. And to bring it back to that bobcat story again, with the habitat fragmentation we're worried about, we're working with a different student at University of Delaware now, and the New Jersey Department of Transportation is collaborating as well, where we have now a bunch of cameras set up at 40 different locations under 6 major highways in northern and central New Jersey at structures that are likely passable by wildlife, to see if bobcats and other wildlife are in fact using them. And the cameras have been up for since this summer, and so far bobcats have been observed at 11 of the 40 sites so far, including Route 78, which is great because that's one of the sticking points that we seem to see with their distribution. So again, just trying to figure out where there's already structures in the ground that we can work with. But then we also have a number of wildlife crossings that were built with wildlife in mind. There's actually about 50 of them that have been permitted in New Jersey. And this is one more layer in our change mapping. It's called the Road Wildlife Mitigation Projects layer. And it's kind of our central repository of these structures that have been built with wildlife in mind. And interestingly, over 30 of them have been permitted since 2016. And the reason for that is that the DEP has a flood hazard regulation. And in 2016, an amendment came into play, went into effect, where terrestrial wildlife crossings needed to be taken into account when a bridge or culvert was being replaced. And so it's a result of that that a lot of additional projects have been permitted since 2016. This is one of them. This is up in Sussex County. Again, it's in a great location in a change mapped corridor. And this was a bridge that was being replaced. So when they replaced it, they were required to take into account terrestrial passage. And so they did so by just widening the footprint a bit to allow natural stream bank underneath that structure as well, which is fantastic. Again, if you're a deer or any kind of wildlife walking along that riparian corridor, you're most likely just going to keep on going underneath that structure. It's very friendly versus taking the effort to go up and over the road and being in harm's way. Another example is in Mercer County. This is in Hopewell Township. Again, right in the middle of a change corridor. A structure was being replaced. And I should note that in this layer, in the change mapping, if you click on one of these circles, same kind of thing where a pop-up window comes up and there's some links at the bottom that take you. We've tried to get before and after pictures of these in the database. So this is what the structure there looks like. Before, it was a structure that was just all inundated with water. There was no dry areas within that structure, and just not a lot of terrestrial species like wading through water. They're more likely going to go up and over. So what they did in this case was they put these concrete shelves, these dry shelves on either side of the structure. And that one we had monitored for a bit with cameras and found that there was a number of species that were using those dry shelves rather than going on the roadway. So I've kind of skipped ahead a little bit about what a uh, wildlife crossing is. And I think you probably kind of get the idea now, but we do have an illustration. This is from our guidance document that just kind of lays out the element of what an effective wildlife crossing is. And it's just one that has dry passage for terrestrial wildlife. Often if natural substrate can be included, like logs and rocks, that's even better, or natural stream bank if it can be wide enough without causing flooding issues. If the animal can see all the way through to the other side, that tends to be a lot friendlier. There's native vegetation on the outside of it. Um, those are all great features of an effective crossing structure. And another important element is fencing, that it's really important in almost all these cases to have fencing tied closely to the structure to prevent wildlife from going up on the road, a little bit of a distance away from the structure. And it also helps kind of filter them to the structure so they start using it and become accustomed to using that spot as the place to cross the road. We do have road segments mapped in our change mapping. So these are areas that are within the change cores and corridors that have natural habitat on both sides of them. So good places to start thinking about wildlife crossings. And if you click on one of those segments, again, a pop-up comes up, link at the bottom, takes you to the section of the guidance document that talks about building wildlife crossings. It has that illustration for engineers to help explain what a wildlife crossing is, and these charts that kind of spec out important measurements for different species that's effective for them to be able to use that crossing. So a couple of those, well, I should say we've also built ones that weren't necessarily part of a regulation, a part of a culvert or bridge replacement, but more were based on knowing that a lot of mortality was happening in a particular spot where there might not be any bridge or culvert. So this is one in central New Jersey in a wildlife management area that we worked on building for amphibians and reptiles. There was a lot of amphibians and reptiles getting killed on this road. There was nice wetlands on both sides of the road. So these structures were built, these tunnels, fencing, you can see, that then connect them. In this case, it has a graded top, it's called, so that allows water and light to get in, which is often helpful for amphibians, especially. And it's been very successful. There was, before that was put in place, there were about 180 different animals killed on that section of road over a year's time. And then after the fact, we monitored it with cameras and then the roadway also for roadkill. And at least 45 different turtle pass-throughs happened. There were 16 reptiles and amphibians confirmed using the tunnels, 9 different species of mammals, and there were no roadkill turtles or reptiles in that project area, which was fantastic. And just some neat videos of a mink, for instance, using the tunnel, or eastern cottontail. We've also done some retrofit. So under the Atlantic City Expressway, we've worked with the South Jersey Transportation Authority. They had built like 15 or so years ago some gabion basket shelves when they had widened the AC Expressway in one spot. They put gabion baskets as dry passage shelves in some of the structures before that regulation even existed. And we just found in working with them that that gabion basket structure was tough. There's metal and just wildlife. It's a tough surface for wildlife to walk on. So we worked with them to put boards on top and natural substrate so that it's more inviting for animals to use. And that too has been really successful. And worked on shoring up the fencing. Like I said, the fencing is an important part so that animals don't breach it and go up over the road instead of using the dry passage shelves. And we've captured well over 20 different species using those structures, which is cool. And I should mention too that the South Jersey Transportation Authority installed a little kiosk in the Farley Service Center on the AC Expressway. So if you're ever going through there, they have a kiosk talking about their environmental program, including information about these wildlife crossings with a monitor that scrolls through different footage that we've gotten from those shells, which is neat to check out. And then the last one I just wanted to highlight that's coming soon, hopefully, is amphibian crossing project up in northern New Jersey. So this is probably the largest amphibian migration location in the whole state, where amphibians are going from the uplands habitat on the west side where they're overwintering, and they have to cross this really busy county road to get to the vernal pool where they need to go to breed. And there's just a whole lot of mortality, unfortunately, that happens during that process. So my colleague Mackenzie Hall has been working on this project and the Conserve Wildlife Foundation. They actually have, you may have come upon it even, like volunteers out there on warm spring nights coming up soon, where all these amphibians are crossing from the upland to get to that vernal pool. And they've documented over 20,000 of them between 2012 and 2023. So definite hotspot over a short stretch of road. So we applied for a federal grant. It's called a Transportation Alternatives Program grant a few years ago, and we're successful in getting it. And so we'll be installing, hopefully, finally this fall, 4 different tunnels that'll be big enough to accommodate much larger wildlife as well, and fencing that'll go between them. So we're really excited to get that one built. And I forgot Mackenzie had this little animation just to clarify what's happening. So overwintering, breed, go back to the uplands habitat. So how you can learn more is going to our Change website. Like I said, that's kind of the one-stop shop. We do have an email list, a listserv. It comes out occasionally with information about habitat connectivity news in the state. There's archive listservs that are on our website, and you can sign up to receive new ones that go out. Occasionally, we post to our Fish and Wildlife Facebook and Instagram pages. And then, the change, these tools are meant for planning purposes too, to help with natural resource inventories, master plans, etc. So if you're involved in a capacity like that, please make use of them. The NJ Wildlife Tracker application, something anybody can use. Like I said, you can use it on your phone or on your computer to report rare wildlife to us of any kind anywhere. And then on roads, particularly any wildlife species, you can report to us so we can start getting a better understanding of where wildlife are trying to cross. That culvert assessment, that's one that's folks can get trained in if you're interested. Montclair State University is the state lead coordinating that, and then just sharing it with others, with your local environmental commission, planning board, etc. And the Nature Conservancy too, wanted to mention, got a grant to film habitats and highways training modeled after something that's been very successful in Vermont. So our program, Fish and Wildlife, DOT, the Nature Conservancy all participated in the filming of this last year. And many of the northeastern states did as well, talking about wildlife crossing efforts in their state. And we're looking forward to that coming out. That'll be publicly available this coming year. And lastly, just wanted to mention the New Jersey State Museum has a new exhibit. They're in Trenton, if you haven't been there before. New exhibit coming on line mid-April about ecosystems at risk, and they'll be highlighting the Change Project and habitat connectivity, and the Nature Conservancy contributed some photos and such to that as well. So that's what I've got. Here's our main website and email address, and then I'm going to pass it on to TNC. And I'll stop sharing here.
Awesome. Thanks, Gretchen. I think Phil, there we go. Always great to hear you talk, Gretchen. I always learn more. Um, really great stuff going on. And it's great that you mentioned that Habitat for Highways training. That's something that is still they're wrapping up those filmings. I didn't talk about it in my presentation, so I'm glad you touched on it. So hey
Yeah.
everyone, my name's Elliot Nagel. I'm the Director of Lands for the New Jersey chapter of the Nature Conservancy. I oversee our land protection and our preserve stewardship work. And Phil, if you want to advance. So the Nature Conservancy is a global organization. We're focused on conserving the lands and waters in which all life depends. Really large goal and mission for the organization. So I'm going to start kind of on a large scale and narrow our way in. Today I'm just going to give an overview of some of our land protection efforts in the state and talk about our work to develop cores and corridors of protected land and habitat. So starting on a large scale, we all know that, we're in a biodiversity crisis right now. We're seeing a significant loss of species over the last century, roughly 70% decline. We're seeing species extinctions worldwide, which are driven by habitat loss from deforestation, land use changes, and climate change. And we're seeing, with that loss of habitat and with that loss of biodiversity, potential negative impacts on people. And so, 75% of global food crops rely on pollinators, and our forests filter roughly 40% of the water for the world's largest cities. So we're highly dependent on these habitats, which we're seeing lost. And so, Phil, if you want to advance. On the right here, you'll see a map. It's an animation that TNC Science has put together that's looking at the migration patterns of animals, specifically in the Americas right now. And what you can see is this is expected migration in the face of changes in climate. And you'll see migration both northward in latitude and upward in elevation. And in the eastern US, this migration in this diagram you can see here is focused, and we're moving pretty quick, is focused on the Appalachian Mountain Range. The Appalachians, because they are oriented north to south and have changes in elevation, allow for an opportunity for species migration in the face of changes in climate. If you can advance, Phil, you might have to hit it a couple times. Yeah. One more time. There we go. So for this reason, because of this importance in terms of migration regionally, the Appalachians are considered a global focal place for the organization. As I've mentioned, they're a hotspot of biodiversity, containing some of the largest remaining tracts of temperate broadleaf deciduous forests in the world. At the same time, it's right at the intersection with high population centers. This is where we're seeing over half of people in North America live within a day's drive of the Appalachian Mountain region. For this reason, this extremely important region is under threat to development and fragmentation due to its adjacency to high population centers. If you advance, Phil. So when we zoom in, so the Appalachian Mountains, we have a tiny portion of it in New Jersey, right? So the northwestern part of the state, Warren and Sussex counties, are where we touch down, where the Appalachians touch down in the state of New Jersey. If you look at this map here, you can see different core habitats as part of the Appalachian Mountain Range. You have the Kinnatini Ridge, which if you think about the water gap, down through Pennsylvania, down into West Virginia, is a really core habitat. And then you have the New York, New Jersey highlands, which run from New Jersey up through New York into Connecticut and then Massachusetts. Connecting these core habitats is this area that we call Bobcat Alley. This is a really small connector, and you can see how if we were to lose these connections right here in the middle of Warren and Sussex counties, we would actually lose this critical connection to much larger corridors for wildlife to migrate across the region. So if you advance, Phil, when we look at Bobcat Alley further, if you zoom in, this animation is going to show protected lands. So we've been focusing a lot of our efforts in land protection, coordinating with our local, state, county, federal partners, as well as our nonprofit partners to protect land in this region, to promote the protection of this corridor connecting both the Kinnatini Ridge and the New Jersey, New York highlands region. As we protect land, you can see we're kind of building, one puzzle piece at a time. We're trying to build this corridor, as Gretchen was explaining, of protected habitat that allows wildlife to safely migrate throughout this region. And we're slowly getting there. I think as of now, we're close to roughly 2,000 acres of protected land in this core habitat right here. You can advance, yeah. So a lot of our land protection work with Nature Conservancy in New Jersey is focused in the Appalachian region for the reasons I've described. However, there are also many important habitats that require land protection across the state. And if you saw in a lot of the maps Gretchen was pointing out, different areas across the state, whether that's through the central corridor of the state down into the Pinelands region. The state of New Jersey, and some of this is a bit redundant to what Gretchen had explained, but the state of New Jersey has seen the loss of over 1 million acres of critical habitat and farmland since the 1940s. We've seen an increase in population, roughly 500,000 people just since 2010. And all of this has resulted in an increase in habitat fragmentation statewide. We can advance. And so a couple things. So what does this mean? Actually go back one. So let's look at this pie chart. Okay, there we go. Playing jokes on me, Phil? Just kidding. So if you look at this pie chart at the bottom of the screen, this is what Gretchen was explaining. We have a third of the state has protected lands. This is huge, right? So when you look at a lot of other states across the country, or you look at other countries across the world, there are goals that a lot are shooting for to achieve a third of their land protected by 2030. So 30% by 2030. We've already achieved that in the state of New Jersey due to substantial investments by nonprofit partners and the state in land protection. So we're currently at a position where we have 30% of the land protected statewide, 30% has been developed, and roughly 30% is available. Think of available land as natural land that has not been permanently protected, it's not preserved, but it also hasn't been developed yet, right? It's projected that given the rate of development and population growth in the state of New Jersey, we will be the first state in the nation to reach what's called functional build-out, where we no longer have this available land. Every parcel is either preserved or developed. And we've been part of an effort that was launched by the New Jersey Conservation Foundation, which was called the Nature for All effort, which puts out a 2050 vision for the state, where it's outlined the need to achieve 500,000 acres of protected land in order to achieve our goals of biodiversity protection in the state of New Jersey. So we're hoping to achieve 500,000 acres with our partners. However, it's not necessarily going to be an easy task, right? When you look at the graph at the top, it shows a decline in conservation rates steadily across the state, whether that's from nonprofit or local or state partners. So this is going to require us all of our partners to work together in collaborative ways that we haven't before in order to achieve this goal. If you advance. So we work with Rowan University and New Jersey Conservation Foundation to launch an effort called New Jersey Conservation Blueprint, which was simply just the idea of how do we bring together all of the partners in the state that are thinking about land protection and conservation to develop a map, right? A blueprint of where we should be protecting our land and strategizing and combining our efforts moving forward. This effort, though these three entities are the leaders of this coalition, this effort includes state, local, agency partners, federal partners, includes many nonprofit academic partners that have worked together to launch a vision for protected lands in the state of New Jersey. So this map that you're seeing right now is the ecological integrity map. And if you look at this diagram, you can see there's also an agricultural map. We have water quality, community green space. There's a number of different focal areas you can look at using this mapping tool. But if you focus on ecological integrity, this is pulling together many different sources of data, including endangered species habitats, wetlands, forested lands, and change data. So much of the change corridor data that Gretchen was just explaining, that's also pulled into this to help identify where are the really important lands to be protected for a multitude of purposes in the state of New Jersey. So we've been working with our partners to really rethink how we work together in accelerating the rate of protection across the state. But one thing I'll mention before I pass it on to Phil is whether that's our work in the Appalachians or our work with our partners statewide, no matter how much land we protect, if it remains fragmented by large highways and roads, we will never achieve the maximum potential in terms of making sure that we have habitats that are connected for wildlife to safely cross, right? So we're only doing part of the work, right? So as a state and as partners, we need to work together to ensure that we're developing these road crossings that are critical in connecting the protected lands that we're protecting. So I'll pass it on to you, Phil.
All right, I think I'm on. Elliot, I swear I wasn't messing with you. I'm doing my own stunts back here with controlling the side. So I apologize for any delay. My Zoom seems to be running a little slow, but thank you everybody and good afternoon. I get the pleasure of closing us out for this presentation. As mentioned in the beginning, my name is Phil Echeverria and I am the Director of Government Relations for the Nature Conservancy. Let me just take a quick moment to thank you all for joining our call today. I realize I'm a slide behind, so give me a second to catch up. And then we're here. Okay. No, not yet.
Like what you see? Well, you've got policy to thank for it.
Okay, I apologize. Like I said, I'm doing my own stunts here. For those who are joining us for the first time, welcome. I'd like to introduce you all to our Government Affairs Department and briefly talk about the importance of policy and its impact on protecting nature and people. The Nature Conservancy has created this video, which does a much better job than I can explain the depth of our work. So I figured we could take a couple minutes just to listen to this video. And please let me know if you have any trouble hearing the audio.
Like what you see? Well, you've got policy to thank for it. That's right. In the United States, local ballot measures fund your neighborhood parks. State laws help clean the air you breathe. Federal protections save the animals and places you love. You only need to look around to see how policy shapes the natural world you depend on for, well, everything. Let's not take it for granted. The more the planet heats up and the more plants and animals disappear, the more nature needs an advocate. Enter the Nature Conservancy. Every day, we make sure nature has a voice in the policies our elected leaders create. How, you ask? We work with partners to write and pass laws that protect nature, tackle climate change, and strengthen communities. We work behind the scenes to shape the rules and regulations that bring those laws to life. And we defend laws against cutbacks and surprises, so they continue to work the way they're meant to. Yeah, policy is a process. And the Nature Conservancy stands up for that process, because policy makes conservation possible. The food you love? It's even better for you and the planet when grown and raised in nature-friendly ways. National parks and public lands? More protected places mean more fun for everyone. Bald eagles, sea turtles, and humpback whales. Our world wouldn't be the same without them. Or how about healthy forests? They soak up planet-warming carbon and protect us from floods, wildfires, and droughts. The Nature Conservancy advocates for all these policies and many, many, many more. Of course, we can't do it alone. It's a process that needs your voice, because we all have a role to play in creating a world where people and nature thrive.
All right. I recognize that we're close to time, so I'm going to move through my slides as quickly and as efficiently as possible so we can have time for questions. But let me underscore a point from this video. The Nature Conservancy is nonpartisan. We follow the science and use our experience to shape policies for the future. Here in New Jersey, we are working to build resiliency, protect our valuable habitats, and use nature to fight the impacts of climate change. But in order to strengthen, protect, and preserve New Jersey, we must change the laws and regulations that govern our environment. The way the world was viewed 50 years ago is different than the realities we face today, and it is up to us to modernize our laws to reflect the challenges we face. As you heard from Gretchen and Elliot, when it comes to protecting our lands and waters on which all life depends, there is one big impediment that is impacting our work, and that is development. We've all seen it from the warehouses that pop up, the forest is destroyed for new home development, roads being widened to accommodate a booming population. The truth of the matter is development is outpacing conservation. And you'll see on this slide how large and how fast development is occurring. Over 3,000 warehouses throughout the state, a booming demand for housing and real estate in New Jersey, and with a growing population, the need to update roadways and transportation to handle an increase of cars on the road. All this development impedes wildlife. What was traditionally a migration path for a bobcat is now a warehouse. The stream that connected salamanders to their natural breeding ground, now blocked by a 2-lane road, or even a culvert placed in to help with flooding that doesn't take into account how an animal might use it, all creates barriers for wildlife migration. And it doesn't have to be that way. If we look at our transportation system now, we can see how much intersects our state, often cutting between valuable green spaces and creating islands of habitats which animals can't move. Wildlife vehicular crashes are a costly accident leading to expensive car repairs, high medical bills, and unfortunately at times, loss of life. It's no secret that New Jersey is the most densely populated state, and due to this density, wildlife strikes cost New Jersey residents an estimated $90 to $150 million of damages each year. But as we heard from Gretchen, New Jersey isn't just sitting by and doing nothing. We are right-sizing culverts to allow animals to cross under busy roadways. We're identifying areas in need of protection, and we're working with partners to increase projects in the state. Habitat connectivity isn't new to us. I always like to highlight the terrestrial crossing bridge over 78, picture to the right over here, as a project that is a foundation of a lot of stuff that we've done in New Jersey. And while I wish we all had the budget to do big bridge crossings, there are much smaller projects like Gretchen highlighted that can be done that have big impacts. Proactive planning, closer agency collaboration, and best practices could allow New Jersey to be a leader in the country on how to effectively implement corridor projects in high-density areas and states. Gretchen and her colleagues are doing amazing work with her partners at the Department of Transportation, but sometimes we need policy to help codify the work that we are doing and to ensure that nature-inclusive infrastructure becomes the norm and not the sometimes. Which is why the Nature Conservancy has worked on and is advocating for legislation that would direct the Department of Environmental Protection and the Department of Transportation to create a wildlife corridor action plan. This legislation, sponsored by Senator Smith and Assemblyman Calabrese, would set forth recommendations on how to identify, set criteria for, and implement best practices around creating wildlife corridors in our transportation. The Nature Conservancy's government affairs team has been in the halls of Trenton advocating for this bill and raising awareness around this issue. From the top of our state to the bottom, from coast to mountain, urban to rural, this issue impacts the entire state, and our senators in the legislature agree. In fact, on October 30th, all 40 state senators voted in favor of this bill, something that I haven't seen in my career. But our advocacy isn't done yet. The legislation still needs to move through the state assembly during a difficult budget year. TNC remains committed in working with our legislative partners to ensure New Jersey is working to preserve our state's corridors and protect animal migration. But let me add a little more detail to what this bill does. From a planning and implementation perspective, it would provide new criteria for transportation to consider and effectively implement corridor projects in the state. It would empower the state to consider transportation impacts to wildlife migration and critical corridors. And by having a corridor plan would allow the state to draw down on federal funds specifically available for crossing projects. From an impact perspective, when our infrastructure is nature inclusive, we can decrease costly animal vehicular crashes and lower costs for residents. Nature inclusive infrastructure can protect those natural migration paths and ecosystems critical to maintaining healthy habitats in our state. And most importantly, it will set a pathway forward to integrating crossings into our transportation for generations to come. Regardless of the next governor or legislature, this law will continue to protect our environment and our wildlife for generations to come. I'm sorry, Gretchen, I stole this from the change video, which I highly recommend everybody to take a look at it. It's highly impactful. But I would like to leave you all with this question. Why now? I mentioned earlier in my section that development is outpacing conservation. I think seeing this visually helps paint a clearer picture. To me, the scary part is it doesn't feel like it, but 2010 was 15 years ago. Imagine what the state would look like in 2025. This is why there's no time to wait and why TNC will continue to fight for policy changes to protect our nature, our wildlife, and advocate on behalf of those who feel more needs to be done. So I know we sped through that, but I want to leave time for questions. So I'll pause here and turn it over to Lily.
Perfect. Thank you, Phil, Elliot, and Gretchen. That was an awesome presentation. We have quite a few questions here. We'll do our best to answer as many as we can. So first question we have here, where is the bridge that you showed a picture of on Route 78, Phil?
Sorry, I was looking for the mute button. I forget where exactly the township it is. Gretchen, do you know where that bridge is located?
Yeah, it's by the Watchunk Preservation, and actually that the road mitigation layer that I showed in the change mapping, it's in there with pictures like Phil showed. But it's kind of the more eastern exits. I'll see if I can pull up a link to it as we're chatting here.
Awesome, thank you. This sounds like it's a question for Gretchen. Are the mortality sightings mapped or available somewhere?
They are mapped, so like I mentioned, that NJ Wildlife Tracker, we encourage folks to submit records of wildlife on roads. And we, as Fish and Wildlife, collect data on particular species. Like I mentioned, bobcats, we map very closely those road mortalities. Black bears, coyotes, there's a number of species that my colleagues also map. They're available in a general sense, like that map that I showed during the presentation. When it's a listed species, we're restricted from giving out precise locations of species. So we don't, disseminate the information that precisely for those, but they are mapped. We have them and we use them accordingly to help, justify particular projects and such.
Thank you. Seems like we have another one here for you, Gretchen. Do wildlife passages with wider openings have the added benefit of lessening blockages and or damage done during flooding events?
Yeah, from what I understand, I mean, I'm the wildlife person, not the engineering person or the land use folks, but we work closely with them. And there's a lot of hydraulic modeling that goes into bridges and culverts and widening them. Like they do make for more resilient structures if you can widen a culvert or a bridge to allow more stream flow, because just the structures themselves are very vulnerable given the increased flooding regimes we've had. But given how urbanized New Jersey is, it's a cause for concern for flooding upstream or downstream. And so they have to be really careful about not increasing that that flooding. So it's kind of these careful calculations that are done.
Awesome, thank you. It looks like we have one here for Phil. Can people get updates about the wildlife corridor bill that you had mentioned during your presentation?
Absolutely. When Lily follows up with an email, if you want to find out more of ways that you can get involved with advocacy, whether it's reaching out to a legislator or helping raise your voice for nature, we'd be happy to pass on that information and see ways that you can get involved with raising awareness around this bill.
Awesome. And it looks like we have time for one more question here. Seems like we have a couple of recent college graduates who are wondering how they can get more involved with work like this or any specific projects that I suppose anyone here is working on. So
Yeah, we unfortunately within Fish and Wildlife have a hiring freeze. And so we are not currently hiring, but there's a number of opportunities, just volunteering to, we have a wildlife conservation corps, it's called, within Fish and Wildlife that you can sign up for to participate in some volunteer projects. We're going to be having producing a more standardized roadkill app, so you could select in the future a section of road and do roadkill surveys on it, the culvert assessments. There's ways for volunteer opportunities. I don't know if TNC has anything to add more about that.
Yeah, just in terms of positions, we've got some seasonal positions. This is the time where we have a lot of seasonals come up. So we've got 3 seasonal positions working with our preserves coming up, and we've got 1 seasonal position coming up working with our protection team specifically on how do we accelerate land protection in the Bobcat Alley region. So definitely stay tuned and keep an eye on those. They should be up soon.
I'll say similar in government relations. Historically, we haven't had opportunities like that, but it's something that we're exploring. And, you know, if those doors do open up, we'd happy to share with this larger group.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for this incredible webinar. For our attendees who are still on the call, you can expect to see a follow-up email from us later this week. It will include links to the recording as well as some of the resources that we were putting in the chat, so you won't lose those. And I just want to thank you all for spending your lunch hour with us. We have another webinar next week on March 6th. It is called Twists and Turns, Improving the Odds for Beach Nesting Birds. We will also have a link for that registration form in the follow-up email. Again, thank you all for joining us today and hope you have a great rest of your day.